Hello there, and welcome back to our podcast, The Promise of Advent. My name is Adam Hamilton. I'm your host, and I'm really glad that you're joining us today. Last week was from my living room. Today I'm here in my office in my study at the church, and really, really grateful for this opportunity to be sharing with you a conversation with some amazing people. And part of what we built this conversation around today, as we're thinking about Advent of 2020 and such an unusual year, this conversation was about our children and thinking about children and teens and the impact this year has had on their lives as we're thinking about Advent and planning for Advent. And I've got a granddaughter who's 6 years old, as many of you know. Her name is Stella. And the other day when her mommy and daddy told her that her school would not be meeting again this fall, that they would be online, she just began to sob. I might have mentioned that in the first episode, but she just began to sob. And my heart broke for this little 6-year-old, that she lives, a little bit in the country, and her connection with kids is in, her classroom at school. She's going to be in first grade, and she was really excited about first grade and all the stuff she was going to do in first grade. And now, it's going to be online, and there's just this discombobulation, I might say, for her. The other day, she was upset because her mommy wouldn't let her eat candy for lunch. And she, put on her winter snow boots in her shorts, and she ran outside and threw herself face down on the pavement and started sobbing there, and it was just like, that's just not her. But there's just she's just, struggling a bit. So anyway, we're going to talk a little bit about this and how that ties into Advent today. I want to introduce you to our panelists. I'm really excited about them. I want to begin with Cindy McNeil, who is the Children's Ministry Director at Impact Church in Atlanta. Impact's an amazing congregation. And Cindy, tell us a little more about yourself.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. It's a great opportunity to be a part of such conversations that we're having with everyone. And it's not just in our local area, but just everywhere. So thank you. I am in Atlanta, and like you said, a part of Impact Church. I'm the Children's Ministry Director. I've been a member at Impact since 2011 and became a part of the leadership staff about 2 years ago. And it's just been an amazing opportunity to continue my work in early childhood education, something I'm very passionate about. I'm also a early childhood education trainer. So putting some of those things into practice, and not only just with those who work in this field, but also it is just a beautiful thing to be able to bring not just the day-to-day simple things that we do or practical things that we do, but to bring our spiritual life into working with our children has been amazing. So I'm excited. Thank you for having me.
Well, we're excited. Impact Church is one of the fastest growing and most dynamic United Methodist churches. Our staff have learned from you. We've actually met with some of your staff. I love your senior pastor, Olu, and I have been friends for a long time and really admire what's going on there. So excited to hear from you today. Matt Rawl is the senior pastor. He's actually I forget the title you use, lead pastor, I think. Is that right?
Lead pastor, yeah.
Lead pastor at Asbury United Methodist Church in Bossier City. And and also a very prolific writer and written some awesome books published through Abingdon. I think all of them are Abingdon's. And Matt, tell us a little more about yourself.
Yeah, lead pastor at Asbury in Bossier City, Louisiana, about 3 hours east of Dallas on the map. And have written several books with Abingdon Press. And I think I'm here because I'm also a dad of 4 kids. And I have seen in real time, up close and personal, the anxiety and the fear, and the story about sobbing with school not starting is very real. And we experienced that in our home. And one thing that we try to do here at Asbury, which I hope will be helpful through our conversation, is how to, what is essential in being the church, especially with children's ministry, because they miss their friends. They miss the incarnational experience of church, of being able to see each other and hug on each other and play in the playground. So what are those strategies? What are those things that we can do to continue that great message of Christ in our own home with our own families, while also keeping people safe?
Absolutely. Well, I'm so glad you're joining us today. And Beth Corey, Dr. Beth Corey is the Associate Professor of the Practice of Youth Education and Peace Building at Candler School of Theology, and I'm really grateful for her heart and her passion. She's also the editor of the CEB Student Bible, and you were also a contributor, if not an editor, to the CEB Women's Bible, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And Beth, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah. So, yes. Adam said, I teach at Candler School of Theology. I teach mainly youth ministry and religious education classes. I've also been the director of the Youth Theological Initiative, just finished 13 years being director of that program, which is normally, pre-COVID, an experience where teenagers come from around the world and live on Emory's campus in intentional Christian community over a period of 3 weeks. And we could not have that program this summer. And we have had to pivot to figuring out how to stay connected with teenagers online, not only because of the quarantine, but also responding to the racial reckoning that we are experiencing in this country at this time, because we are a very racially diverse program. And so I'm excited to be part of this. I have done a lot of pre-work by asking some of my teenagers and youth ministers to give me some input. So I hope I can share from my field notes today.
That's awesome. I know you will, and I know it's going to be great. All right. Well, I'd like to begin by really talking a bit more about your experience of the emotional struggles children are feeling this year. And as you mentioned, Beth, this is largely around COVID for kids, but it's also, we've been in a time of great anxiety and pain related to race, and with George Floyd's murder, our children, some children may be kept oblivious to that, but I think a lot of our children know that there's something going on. We've tried to talk about that with Stella. We know, with our granddaughter, we know with our kids in church, the sermons, I've been addressing this. So what are our kids, what are you hearing? What are they feeling? And I think, I might start with you, Cindy, because I'd like to know how you're interacting with children online right now, and what you're seeing and what your experience is.
The experience for our children is very real. And although they may not know every single thing that is going on, remember, they see and they hear, and they're with us. And a lot of times they take on the feelings, or they interpret how they can what's going on. And I know that even as young as I had a parent with one of our 3-year-olds, we were doing a circle time online and just having a good time. And he says, Miss Cindy, I couldn't get on because my computer has COVID. And, I'm just shocked. I'm like, okay. I said, well, that's okay. You're here now. We continue with the circle time. But I called Mom right after and said, what does that mean? And she said, his computer died. The battery died. And because he had an uncle that passed from COVID, to him, everything that dies has COVID.
Yeah.
And that just touched my heart, because he's only interpreting that the best way that he can with the skills that he has. It's 3, it's what he had. And that's all the way up to our youth who started to reach out when we have different protests going on and they want to be involved. And so we actually had to hold a special Zoom session with our youth to get their feedback. And we went into different breakout rooms, per their age, and just really listened. And the feelings were, we've got to do something different. When you're young and your youth tell you, we've got to do something different. We can't do it the way you did it. We want to be part of something different. And so a big part of what we have to do, because we're not in person, is making sure we're giving the opportunity for our youth, no matter how young, no matter how old, the opportunity to be heard. And that's what we've tried to do as much as possible, whether that's through social media or through our Zoom calls or our regular Sunday calls, or just calling a parent and say, hey, haven't heard what's going on. They just want to be heard. And so that's what we've tried to make one of the big priorities that we're doing.
That's excellent. Beth, how can we help children and teenagers stay spiritually centered during times like this, when their whole world is sort of turned upside down?
Yeah. One of the interesting things that one of my teenagers came back with me from was that what they deeply appreciate about the church is it's one of the few institutions that's actually stable and consistent right now, even if they're not actually attending. It's the fact that that's the same when their school, they don't know if it's going to be online or hybrid. They don't know when it's going to come up again. There's so many things, all of their activities have been canceled. There's so much that's up in the air. But just knowing that there's this institution and this community that is consistent has been helpful to them. And so one of the things I've thought about is, how do we help children and youth stay spiritually centered? I mean, the first thing is, how do we stay spiritually centered? Because if we're not spiritually centered, then it all leaks through, right? I mean, the kids are picking up at whatever age, they're picking up our anxiety. They're watching how we're handling the stress. And as to Cindy's point, like, we're not necessarily even asking them about their stresses or what they actually know or how they actually think about things. And so I think the first step is, how do we get spiritually centered so that we can be that as much as possible, that grounding for them that they know they can always come back to. I mean, so I work with teenagers, right? And we know that teenagers and young adults are kind of have one foot in the church and one foot out. But it's the knowing you can pull that foot back in at any point that I think is what they really need right now. And I'll say one other thing. I have a colleague who has been switched to online like everyone else, and has been doing Lectio Divina and the Daily Examen with his teenagers. And the reason why I think those things work, particularly I want to say the Daily Examen, is because right now our lives are really small. Our worlds are really small, right? We are going out more and more, but for the most part, your world is your house or your apartment or this space that you have. And so we're kind of living a monastic life already. And so leaning into some of the practices that our tradition says as part of what it means to be part of a monastic community, where you're looking at what's around you and reflecting on yourself as that is happening. It's such an easy practice to do, but mostly we never have time to do it, or actually our days are so busy to do a daily examen. My experience, to do a daily examen after a long, super busy day, I fall asleep before I can finish going through the daily examen, right? But if you actually have fewer things, how rich can that experience be? So I'm always a big proponent of, let's just go back to the tradition. Like, there are things, and with children, with younger children, I mean, a daily examen is just like up and down. Like, where did you see God today? Where did you feel energy today? And where did you feel energy draining from you today? I mean, the daily exam is so adaptable across the developmental perspective that I think, I feel spiritual centeredness comes from us doing our own practices, which is, easier said than done. I'm the first to confess I'm not that great at it. But breathing, and then pulling on our tradition.
Yeah, I think that's really good. We felt here at the church that it was a time for a kind of back to the basics, when everything else seems to be in upheaval. This is a time to remind people some really fundamental things about how we practice our faith, about what we believe and why we believe it. And I think that's felt right for, our congregation. And I'm thinking what you've just described is with our children too. And, while the daily examen may be essential and basic, a lot of people don't know it and aren't really familiar with the practice. And so I think that's really great. If you're not familiar with the practice, go look it up online. You can find a lot of information about it. I carry in my pocket testament with me. It's a little tattered now, but these seven pieces to the daily examen. And I just, every day to be able to go through and remember these basic things and to practice them. Okay, Matt, I want to know from you, how are you connecting with the children in your congregation right now? What does children's ministry look like? I know you tell us you're back in worship, but how many are back in worship, and what's that mean for your children's programs?
Yeah, so we are back in worship. At least the state of Louisiana is in phase 2. So we can have a 50% capacity, which I'm sad to say during the summer is fine. we're good there. Interestingly enough, there are not a lot of young families who have been attending because we can't quite do children's church and Sunday school. So they're choosing to stay home and to watch online. One of the first things I noticed with my own kids is how very differently they've reacted reacted to this, and maybe the viewers may identify with that, at least one of these ways of dealing with this stay-at-home way of life. My oldest, who is 13, has been quite excited about the whole thing because most of her life was already online through social media. And when we told her that we were going to do online school for the first 9 weeks, she said, "Sign me up," because that's already her life. That is how she's connecting with her friends. And she said, I can look at my iPad all day. This is great. So my 13-year-old has been just fine during all of this. My 11-year-old, however, she is our achiever, and she's also very anxious. So her primary concern was, can I still get A's with online school? Like that was kind of her anxiety of, what am I going to be missing if I'm not in person, right? So there was this bubbling up anxiety of what am I going to be missing? Am I going to be behind? So this anxiety of what the next day will bring. Our 7-year-old, she had in her own way, a profound sadness because at her age and stage, she's all about the play dates and sleepovers and going to the playground. She doesn't have an online presence. So when we say online school, there's a great sadness because they're not online. It's very hard for her friends to connect. So they could be in India for all we know because we've been distant. So for her, there's a profound sadness. And then my 4-year-old, we just try to keep him to not run with scissors. So we'll see how he one day will react to that. In the church specifically, we've had several drive-through fellowships. In fact, this Sunday, we're passing out our 3rd grade Bibles through a drive-through ceremony and kind of kicking things off with them and celebrating this marker, because there are a couple of markers that like the class of 2020 has missed. So there's a grief. Right? Graduation was so very different. Confirmation was different. 3rd grade Bible Sunday is so very different. So we're trying to be as hopeful as we can when we see our kids. And one thing I learned through Katrina, because I'm originally from just north of New Orleans, is for a time there, it was important for the church to address Katrina and the devastation and the hardship. But it didn't take long for the people in the pews to not want to hear about the hardship and the hurricane and the destruction, because that was Monday through Saturday. That was their life. And they were really looking for the sanctuary to be a sanctuary and to be a place of hope. So that's really the slice that we've been working with our kids is being hopeful and being positive and reminding them that they are loved and that they're not alone. That's probably number one. They're not alone. I know it feels like you're alone when you're 7 years old, but you're not alone.
Yeah. So I want to come back to this question of Advent and how does the message of Advent and the season of Advent, how does that help? How do we address Advent in a way that speaks to children and helps them find hope this year? As we're getting to the end of the year, they will have also been through the elections. And I think about, when my earliest recollection of an election, I was in 4th grade. And I still remember, the buttons and the election was going on. This year, a more divisive nation than maybe we've ever experienced. And the COVID on top of that. So how does Advent, how are you using Advent, or how would you anticipate using Advent as a season to help address or our children find hope, children and teens find hope? So I'm going to start with you, Cindy. Are you all doing Advent planning already? What are you planning? What are you thinking about for Advent?
We're starting to plan, and I think that we have to remember that this is a season of opportunity, okay? And I think involving our children and our youth as much as possible in this. We've had a lot of traditions that have been around. We don't even know when they came around. We just know that we do it. But what a perfect opportunity for families to work together to create new traditions. And that can very well come from our students. Right now with our students, we are spending this month of creating their own space to have when they are coming to worship, and how, just their own space to spend time with God. And that's new because you came to church to do that, for a kid. But how do I do that? Just like they're creating these new spaces for classrooms in their home. Creating a new space when we have our spiritual traditions and celebrations. And that's kind of how we're opening this up. Of course, we will talk about what we've always done. If you want to have a candlelight ceremony, like how do we do that via Zoom? Do we send out, candles? Everyone have the same kind, or do we share that on pictures? All of that gives us opportunity. But I think we cannot get away from anything that can be added that's new. And I say that because, we have these different markers that remember things. They remember certain dates, right? Let's take the hope that Matt's talking about. Let's take that hope and let's remember 2020. And maybe there's a new candle that we light for 2020 and we always remember. And maybe that becomes a time when these kids are actually going to tell their kids how they stayed together, how their church held them up, how their relationship with God held them up. This was a hope. And so I think that this time, 2020 is going to become this new story, much like stories we have in the Bible that have this new tradition to it, this new activity to it, not to just, I know everybody's ready to get rid of 2020 and forget it, but how do we remember the things that came out of 2020? Like remember to doing those special times of examining the day, right? That's why I remember when I learned that. I learned that in 2020. So I think this is the opportunity and season about new traditions. And that's kind of how we're going to push with our kids.
I love that. Cindy, one of the things you said that just immediately struck with me is, imagining Matt's 7-year-old, is it a boy or girl, Matt? Girl?
A little girl, yeah.
Imagining Matt's 7-year-old when she's 75 telling her grandchildren about 2020 and pulling out the candle that she saved all these years from when they did candlelight Christmas Eve at home. You can just picture those kind of ways of, and I have shared that LaVon was talking last night about how difficult her job was going to be this fall because it can be online. She's a sign language interpreter for the deaf. And I said, but you're going to talk about that for years, that this is the year that you did this differently. So Matt, talk about what you all are, what plans are you all putting in place right now when it comes to Advent at the church? What ideas?
In terms of a little bit different than Cindy, in terms of remembering the year, that's really going to be our focus for All Saints Sunday, and to try to put a bow on that experience. And Advent is really looking forward, but we're actually going to have a lot of fun this year. Our Advent series this year is called Ugly Sweaters, and it's based on ugly Christmas sweaters. And we're inviting people to take pictures of the ugliest Christmas sweater they can find. And what the series really is about is the symbols of our faith. So even if the sweater is garish and has a Christmas tree and actually lights up, and these kind of things, it still gives us an excuse to talk about the symbols of our faith. Those symbols don't change, and they're beautiful. The Christmas tree has been around for a long time. The Advent wreath, we have one at home, and we do an Advent wreath at home. Advent calendars, which is going to be several different sweaters. It's just going to be, it's a lot of fun. We're looking at erring on the side of having fun, but also educating about the symbols that, come hell or high water, the Christmas tree is there, and you have one in your home, and that's okay. And the music of our faith is also there. The style may change, but the hark how all the herald angels sing is still there. So this year in particular, we're having basically an ugly sweater contest as a means of teaching about the symbols of our faith. And that's something that the entire family can get behind and just have fun with.
That's great. So Beth, talk about how, as you think about Advent and children, what would you teach the rest of us? How would you guide the rest of us in terms of how we can make the most of Advent and bringing hope to our children?
So I want to start with building a little bit on your prior question, Adam, because you kind of framed it, reminding us that when we're actually doing Advent, it's going to be post-election. It's also going to be finals time for our older youth. We're going to need a lot of hope, but we need to have a deep, sober hope, not an optimistic, playful, absolutely should have that as well. But I'm thinking about my favorite song, and I only learned about it like a few years ago during Advent, is the Canticle of the Turning. And for those of you who may not be familiar, it's the Magnificat. It's Mary's words put to this ancient Irish tune, which actually was used as a war hymn during the Civil War when there was an Irish contingent. So it has this kind of, the world is about to turn. And what I love about the Magnificat, and is so important in Advent, is that this teenager, Mary, has said yes to something. She's stepping out in faith. She's saying yes to something that she has no idea, like fully what she's saying yes to. But on the other hand, she knows the world is about to turn. And she specifically says tyrants are going to be brought down. She says the hungry are going to be fed. Like, things are going to change now that I have said yes to God. And Advent's the beginning of the liturgical year, right? And we're looking towards this new beginning, this transformation, when we know we're going to be in the midst of so many things. And to Cindy's point about, let's not forget 2020, because we're learning some really important things about what was wrong before the pandemic that we now have an opportunity to change. We're learning new things about ourselves. We're having opportunities to be at home and with our family in ways that we didn't have time to before. We're exploring new ways of being intimate through Zoom that actually opens up ways of connecting that weren't there before. And the creativity that we have from what all y'all are talking about your church is doing. I mean, this is an amazing thing, right? So thinking about, let's lean deep into the fact that the world has broken open and is about to turn, and let's do it. Let's try something new, because this is a Kairos moment that we can seize, change our traditions, or reclaim the tradition, in the ancient tradition, in ways that make sense for the 21st century, that goes deep into the Magnificat of, this is about justice. This is about salvation. This is about transformation. The incarnation means that God has come in and totally turned the world upside down. So that's kind of like my little preaching thing to say, is we need to be preaching about this.
That's awesome. But
really I also just want to do one other thing, which is that as much as we can invite the children and youth to be part of shaping this, please do that. Because the things I'm hearing from my teenagers in particular, and I think it's true even with the younger ones, is the thing about having school taken away from them is it took away structure, which means it took away identity. And they are looking for ways to do meaningful work in the church. And the great thing is we need them more than ever, because they know how to do the technology. They have the ideas for the playfulness. They have, they're already doing the hard race conversations, right? So just my plea is, as you're planning for Advent, ask the teens for their ideas. Ask the children for their ideas. Include them in the videos. Include them in the activities, because they are yearning to be part of this church as co-leaders, not just passive recipients of our ministry.
That's a great word, Beth. Thank you. We're going to take a break here in a second. I do want to remind folks that the first Sunday of Advent follows on the heels of Thanksgiving. And so as you look back over the previous year, there's something about giving thanks that helps us be able to center as we're moving into the season of Advent. And it strikes me that probably, I don't know that I can think of a year where the message of Advent, or the messages of Advent about the coming of Christ, Emmanuel, God with us, the incarnation, light breaking into the darkness, the Word made flesh, the Savior coming to deliver, was more needed than this year. I mean, that message is I need to hear that God is with us in the middle of this. I need to hear that there is light in the darkness, that I'm called to be a part of that light for the darkness. And so we'll come back. We'll talk a little bit more about that after the break. Right now, a commercial break tied into incarnation and the hope of Advent. Take a listen. at Resurrection this year for Advent, we're focusing on the incarnation. And I wrote a book and resources, children's resources and youth and all this on, and what we felt like was we needed to sort of back to the basics, kind of, here's some really fundamental things that we can bank on in the middle of our uncertainty. And it looks at the titles and names given to Jesus in the nativity story. So in Matthew and Luke's account of the nativity and in John's prologue, and then just takes each one of those. So the first one starts with the royal titles of Christ or Messiah or King, and ties in with the fact that we just came out of an election, and that no matter who you voted for or where you stand politically, we have one King. And what does that look like? And then it moves into Jesus as Savior, and then Emmanuel, and then the Word made flesh and light of the world, and finally Lord. But the end of all of that, it's that God came to us in flesh. But then the idea is that we're called to incarnate God's love and the message of Christmas for the world. So we're called to take that out into the world. And one of the things that struck me is this year, kind of like Christmas Eve is usually the Super Bowl for us at Resurrection. We have, we jam people into the choir loft and everywhere we can go. And we have last year we had 19 services to fit everybody in. And we're not going to do Christmas Eve this year. We are not going to become a super spreader event. We're not going to risk having, jamming people in. And so we're going to be sending candles to people's homes, and we're going to be asking them to have a candlelight service at their house. Well, we're going to be online. So they're going to join us for the candlelight service. We're going to sing, we'll do everything we normally do. But then when it's time to light the candles, we'll light candles at the same time in thousands of homes across the city. And then usually we end by singing Joy to the World, and we hold up our candles and say, this is the picture Jesus had of the church as being the light for the world. And we're going to ask them to actually take that song. We'll give the words to them, and they're going to go outside the front door of their house, and they're going to hold their candles up and sing that out into the world, and then, out into their neighborhood. And then we're going to invite people to say, it's a time for us to, instead of bringing Christmas Eve into the building, we're going to be the light for, we're going to take Christmas Eve out into the world. I'm wondering what ideas you all might have for taking Advent and Christmas Eve out into the world with children and youth and families. Do you have thoughts on how we can turn things inside out from being, we do this in the church, to now we're going to do this out in the world? What would that look like? And I'm going to begin, Beth, see if you might have any thoughts about this.
I'll talk until I have one.
Or I can come back.
But I did want to underscore, just this opportunity that we have to really get folks to see that the church is not the building, right? And to actually claim the priesthood of all believers, that we really are all supposed to be bringing God's word out into the world. So I'm so excited about what y'all are doing. I was thinking about, so I'm part of a small church that's a new church start, and we're a couple years into it now. And we've been doing things like having everyone film like a little piece of what they're doing, and then it gets put together. And so we've done things like beach balls, where you actually catch a beach ball that's been thrown off camera and then throw it to the next one, so that it looks like we're all connected when you put it together. And I could imagine doing that with the candles as well, so that you're actually looking like you're lighting the candles as well. And then the other idea I had, again, this is not really about going out in the world, but about how you might do things online, is that we've had some luck with a really sort of ragtag kind of coffee house thing, where people just sign up online to be on Zoom and to sing a song, or it's basically a coffee house. But we've always done a pop-up pageant where whoever shows up, the kids, they can just whoever wants to be a sheep can be a sheep. Whoever wants to be Mary, we can have 10 Marys. It doesn't matter. Usually whatever baby's been recently born gets to be the baby Jesus. But I mean, what if you did a pop-up pageant on Zoom that's sort of like a coffee house, where the MC is like, all right, let me hear from the Marys. And you can kind of engage people with that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean,
Well, I like that. I mean, that's the kind of creative thinking, that we're looking for this year.
Yeah. And I think just because I don't have any concrete ideas, but I'll simply say, the youth have the concrete ideas, right? They're the masters of social media. So what is it you could do on Instagram? What is it that you could do on TikTok that still exists? What are the things that they can be doing? They know how to get the light into the world in their networks, that they can do in ways that that we're doing in our own networks as adults, but they can be doing it in the ways that they do it as well.
Absolutely. We sent you all may have done this, Matt, for Vacation Bible Camp. We got this idea from Tom Berlin and then just kind of made it our own. But we sent a kit out for Vacation Bible Camp. So we did, we had videos prepared. But the kit had amazing crafts and lesson things. And so we've been doing that with Stella. She made, in fact, I'm going to finish it this weekend as I've got her for the weekend myself. But, what kinds of things are you all doing at your church at Asbury to, either are you sending things out? Are there things we can send to our families to do as family crafts, that help the children get the message of Advent? What kind of ideas have you done or are you looking at?
Yeah, that's very similar to what we're doing. We send our kids mail each week that has crafts, that has word searches, that has a lesson. And they're super excited to get something in the mail, period. With their own name on it. It's tangible. It's just for them. And that has really been exciting and a way for them to engage. One, because it's for them and it feels special and tangible. And for Advent specifically, we're doing two things. One, we're doing what's called the Asbury Worships Here campaign, where actually a plug for Amplify Media, they're helping us build an app for Apple TV and Roku and that kind of thing where folks can be in their living rooms. And the way that we're framing it, because Asbury's never planted a campus before, so we're saying, we're starting to plant new campuses this fall, and that campus begins in your own living room. And the idea is to not invite people from your Sunday school, but to invite your literal neighbors to the right and left of you. The folks that you see every day gather for a meal and you watch either the worship service or several of our small groups, and to connect literally with your neighbors. I love how the Common English, or it's the Message that says Jesus moved into the neighborhood. Love that. And the book of Acts says they went from house to house, not steeple to steeple. So kind of living into that model of church. The second thing that we're doing is leading up specifically to Advent. There's a website called Kahoot, not a sponsor, but a website called Kahoot, where you can play online games with each other, like a trivia game. So we have lined up these Advent trivia games that folks, the kids especially, because it's very easy to use for families to use, and it's a means of education about our tradition and music and worship, but it's also fun. It's just fun. Gaming with one another is a great way to interact and for the kids to have fun with each other. And that's on the TV. You can use Zoom and interact. And so Asbury Worship's here, but then also this online quiz that we're going to do each week leading up to Christmas Eve to get people used to connecting in this way, so that it's not just on Christmas Eve that we're asking them to connect on this way. We're going to start building it in October, actually, to give folks some time to live into this new way of worship. That's awesome. That's terrific. Cindy, how about you guys? What are you doing at Impact Church to help children? Do you send them things, or do you anticipate, handing out things that kids can do at home during the season of Advent? What's going on there?
Well, what we started, it all for a leader, and Beth's talked about this earlier, how we're pouring into ourselves, right? How are we getting our energy? And it became overwhelming very quickly to say, how do I take care of all the kids now? And they're not here. How do I get to everyone? How do I know everyone has access? So we really started with the kids that I feel are always at church, the leaders' kids and the volunteer kids. And we have 3 services. We have 8, 10, and 12. And if you are a leader, your child is probably there with you, 8, 10, and 12. Or they're repeating the service over and over again, or our volunteers, if our volunteers are coming in all day. And so I actually started with those group of kids, and they have their very own small group. And we meet every other Sunday. And through that group, if you want feedback, right, you ask a PK kid about feedback, and they'll give you everything that you need. But it's been really about just what Beth alluded to, because even us as leaders, how do we pour? Our families are those ministry leaders as well. And very often, those kids, they all know each other, of course, because my dad or my mom, and they're usually together. And so it became an opportunity for us to really pour into that set of kids before opening up larger what we would do for the entire congregation of sending things out, what it would take, who would get it, who would send it out, really to kind of work that out. And so we started with that very group of kids because I felt like that was the support. Those are the ones that needed the support. And sometimes you don't know you need that support until it actually happens. And, one of our leaders was like, thank you. I just realized that my kid hasn't been to church since March. Because we're the ones that's, even though we're online, we're the ones that's actually still working. And I think a lot of times we kind of forget that. So starting with small group, and then we want to take that, our promotion Sunday, it's going to be the last Sunday of this month, where our third grade promotes up, our sixth grade. And so from that, our next stage is to start our youth small group for our ninth grade. Right now, our middle school and high school meet together for their service on Zoom. And so to give that feel that I promoted up to something is we want to do a small group with our high schoolers, particularly around them receiving a Bible and having the small group on how to use my Bible. And so we're thinking of these things that's going to really help them in their growth, in their spiritual life, but at the same time, some of those moments and traditions that are usually the same, how do we infuse that and not forget it, but how do we do that differently? And so we're kind of approaching with our children of creating these small groups, which have traditionally been done while we were in service, but now how do we do that when we're virtual? And getting them to be the forward or the push on inviting others outside of church. So we invite a friend to church, they can drive to church. But if you invite your friend and you're in third grade, your mom's got to pick them up or their mom's got to drop them off. But virtual, you just give them a link and then your friend can join you for church.
That's awesome. That's exactly right. Well, this has been a great conversation today. And I really want to encourage all of you who've joined us today to continue to brainstorm about what do we do in including children and speaking the message of Advent to children, making sure now more than ever, they need it, we need it, and it's a huge opportunity, especially for folks who are still at home and not worshiping yet in person. As Matt, you mentioned, a lot of families are still holding back, that we're looking at helping our families and proactively helping our families be able to celebrate Advent at home, be able to worship. They may be worshiping online, but then you've got activities for them to be able to do at home, and looking at how we're preparing now, because it takes several months to prepare, right? You can't go buy candles for all the, for everybody and assemble packets on, November 15th and hope you're going to have it done. So we've got to be thinking in advance. How do we help people more than they ever have? I mean, I think, Beth, to your point, we have an opportunity this year to do something that's really remarkable, that elevates our capacity to experience Advent as a family with children, that more so than ever before. So, but be thinking about and dreaming about. These guys have given us some really great ideas today. Thank you so much, Beth, Cindy, Matt, for the ideas and the insights that you've offered us. And I want to encourage you to continue dreaming and thinking about this. If you didn't catch the first webinar, you might want to go back and watch that one as well, because we had conversations there about how churches are doing this when it comes to their preaching, but also some creative ideas about, their choirs going out into the community, having groups that are meeting in porches and parks and a whole host of other places to take Advent and Christmas out into the community. I think you'll enjoy it in the next couple of webinars as well. Please be sure to join us for that. I want to mention that amplifymedia.com, check that out. Matt mentioned this as well. They've got a lot of great resources, and right now they're offering a 14-day free trial to experience the streaming resources that they have for churches. Take advantage of those kind of things. Some really awesome opportunities there. And I'd like to end by closing with prayer, if you would bow with me. God, thank you for every person who's joining us on this webinar. Thank you for their presence. Thank you for their love for children and their love for the church. And we pray, Holy Spirit, that you would guide us, that you would lead us, that you would help us to see ideas we'd never thought of before, that you would help us to be able to bring Advent and Christmas out of the church and into the world in a way that utterly transforms the lives of the people in our congregations and allows them to be light and salt and a witness for you in the world. Help us, O Lord, that we might actually take joy to the world this Christmas and this Advent. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.